She slept beneath a broken wagon for 3 days, until a silent mounted man said, "Come home." The morning was cold and quiet, with a thin layer of mist hovering over the rugged mountain paths. The young woman moved slowly, her boots crunching on the rough stones scattered along the trail. She carried only a small backpack on her shoulders, tightly secured, and a broken wagon behind her. The wagon had been her only means of carrying supplies, but a snapped axle had left it useless, and she had tried all morning to fix it with the limited tools she had. Each failed attempt made her more aware of how far from help she really was. She paused and looked around. The mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks hidden by low clouds, and the narrow trail wound in unpredictable twists. There was no sign of another traveler. No birds sang in the chilly air, and even the wind seemed cautious as it whistled between the rocks. She knew she was completely alone. A shiver ran through her, not entirely from the cold. The realization that she might be stranded here, with no one to find her, weighed heavily on her heart. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself that she had survived difficult situations before. Her family had taught her resilience, and years of hiking and traveling alone had made her capable. Yet this place felt different. The mountains had a quiet power and indifference to human struggle that both awed and frightened her. Her stomach growled softly, reminding her that she had eaten only a small snack that morning. She pulled a few nuts from her pack and nibbled slowly, savoring each bite, as if it could somehow give her strength to solve the problem at hand. Hours passed. She tried to lift the wagon to see if she could realign the axle or find a rock to use as a lever, but the heavy wood resisted all her efforts. Her hands were scraped and stiff, and her fingers ached from the strain. Frustration began to mix with fatigue. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady but growing heavier with worry. The sun, which had been hidden behind clouds, began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the trail like silent fingers. She realized she would have to spend the night here. She searched the surrounding area for shelter. The ground was uneven, littered with stones and fallen branches. There were no caves or overhangs, nothing that offered protection from the cold night air. Finally, her gaze fell on the broken wagon. It wasn't much, but it could give her some cover. She crawled beneath it, curling up as best as she could. The hard ground pressed against her back, and dampness from the soil seeped into her clothes, but it was better than nothing. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and tried to focus on the positives. At least the wind was somewhat blocked, and the wagon created a small, protected space. Night fell quickly, and with it came the full weight of solitude. The darkness seemed to absorb sound, and even the wind now carried a sharper bite. She wrapped herself in a small blanket from her pack, her teeth chattering slightly despite the layers of clothing. She tried to sleep, but every snap of a twig or distant rustle of leaves made her tense. In the silence, she could hear her own breathing and the faint pulse of her heart, reminders of life and the fragility of her situation. As she lay there, memories drifted into her mind. She remembered why she had come to these mountains in the first place. She had wanted adventure, a chance to test her limits, and perhaps to escape the pressures of a life that sometimes felt too heavy. She had hoped the solitude would give her clarity, a sense of freedom. Now, in the shadow of the very mountains she had admired, she wondered if she had misjudged her own strength. Doubt crept in, whispering that she might not be able to survive the night, let alone the days ahead if help did not come. But she refused to let fear control her. She sat up for a moment, brushing dirt from her jacket, and assessed her situation. Her water bottle was half empty, and the small food supply she had brought would not last long. She needed to conserve energy, to think clearly. The solution wasn't clear yet, but she told herself that there had to be a way. She could follow the trail back down, she reasoned, if she had the strength, or perhaps the wagon could be repaired enough to carry her slowly. For now, though, survival meant staying warm and safe until daylight. The first night passed slowly. She shivered in her sleep, waking often to adjust her position or to check the wagon for leaks in shelter. Every sound seemed magnified. The cracking of branches, the distant call of an unknown bird, the whisper of wind over stone. Her imagination, fueled by exhaustion, conjured shapes in the shadows, making her heart race. She clutched her small blanket tighter, reminding herself that she was strong and capable, that the mountains were harsh but not unbeatable. She had faced storms and fatigue before. She could face this, too. Morning brought a weak light, pale and gray, spilling over the peaks. She stretched, sore and stiff, and sipped the remaining water from her bottle. Hunger pressed against her stomach, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic, she knew, would only waste energy and make her more vulnerable. She inspected the wagon again, hoping perhaps the night's rest had brought clarity, but it remained stubbornly immobile. The problem had not solved itself, and the trail ahead still looked long and daunting. Determined, she began to move again. She explored a little further along the path, searching for anything that might help: loose rocks to use as levers, sticks that could reinforce the wagon, or even a clear path that might lead to shelter or help. Every step was heavy, her muscles protesting, but she reminded herself to focus on small successes. When she found a sturdy branch, she tried to push and lift the wagon just enough to test if it could be shifted. The effort exhausted her, leaving her breathless and shaky. Still, she refused to give up. By the second night, the weather had worsened. Clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, and a light drizzle began. The mountain air, damp and cold, seeped through her clothes and made the wagon shelter feel even smaller. She huddled beneath it again, her body stiff from hours of labor. Her fingers were numb, her face cold, and her stomach ached from hunger, but she kept her mind busy with thoughts of survival. She planned her next moves, counting steps in her head, estimating distances, and imagining the moment she would finally see a familiar sight: a cabin, a trail sign, or any hint of human presence. Isolation brought reflection. She thought about her family, her friends, the life she had temporarily left behind. She thought about the choices that had led her here, the desire for independence, the courage to face the unknown. She understood that these mountains would not forgive carelessness, and she resolved to be cautious, patient, and observant. Every sound, every shadow, every ripple in the wind could mean danger, or the first sign of help. The third day arrived slowly, stretching her endurance to the limits. She was weaker, slower, and more aware of her vulnerability. Her small reserves of water and food were nearly gone, and the weather showed no sign of easing. Still, she managed to find small comforts: a sheltered nook near a tree root, a clear spot where she could rest without wet soil pressing against her, a patch of dry wood for a tiny fire. These small victories reminded her that she could survive, that she could endure. As the sun began to sink again, a strange stillness settled over the mountains. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. She lay beneath the wagon, eyes scanning the surrounding rocks, listening for anything unusual. Then she noticed a movement, a shadow, subtle and deliberate, far along the trail. Her heart leapt. Could it be another traveler? Could it be someone who might help? She held her breath, unsure whether to call out or stay hidden. The figure moved slowly, almost silently, and the sense of mystery made her pulse quicken with both hope and fear. And in that quiet moment, as the day began to fade into night once more, she realized that her struggle was not over. but that the first sign of help, or perhaps a new beginning, was finally near. She waited, tense but ready, knowing that whoever or whatever was out there might change everything. The second day had stretched endlessly, and exhaustion pressed heavily on her. She had spent the entire morning trying to coax some movement from the broken wagon, but it refused to budge. Every push and lift sent shocks of pain through her shoulders and back. The mountain path offered no mercy. Loose stones tumbled beneath her feet, forcing her to move carefully with each step. Her fingers were raw and stiff, the skin scraped from gripping the wagon, and her stomach protested with a dull, constant ache. Yet she refused to give up. Each small task became a battle, but she took them one at a time. She gathered rocks to form a makeshift lever, carefully testing their weight and placement, hoping that she might nudge the wagon just enough to move it to a safer spot. Her hands were trembling, not just from the cold, but from the effort and the constant worry that she might be here alone for much longer. Every glance at the trail ahead reminded her how far she still was from any chance of help. The sky remained gray, and the clouds seemed lower today than the day before. A light drizzle began in the late morning, dampening her hair and clothing. She quickly covered herself with a thin raincoat she had in her backpack, but the chills still seeped into her bones. Even the small tasks, like adjusting her position beneath the wagon or stacking rocks, became difficult in the wet, slippery conditions. Her body ached from fatigue, but her mind refused to succumb to despair. She reminded herself that giving up now would achieve nothing. Survival depended on her focus and patience. She paused to take a sip of water, savoring the tiny amount left in her bottle. The taste was faintly metallic, but it felt like a gift. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she forced herself to eat sparingly, taking just a few nuts and dried berries from her pack. Each bite was a reminder that she could survive, that she had enough to get through this day. Her thoughts wandered to her family and friends, but she quickly pushed them aside. Worrying about home would not fix the wagon, nor would it make the mountain any less dangerous. She needed to stay present, to observe, to act. Hours passed in quiet struggle. The rain picked up, and she felt drops trickle down her face. She pulled herself closer under the wagon, trying to stay dry, but the ground was damp and unforgiving. Her back pressed against rough wood and cold dirt, and her hands were nearly numb from the combination of wetness and work. Still, she refused to give in to fear. She thought of the first day, of how she had survived one night in the cold, and she reminded herself that she could survive another. At midday, she decided to move away from the wagon for a short time, hoping that a brief walk might give her insight or reveal a nearby path. Her legs were heavy and sore, but she stepped carefully over the loose rocks, scanning the terrain. The mountains were alive with quiet sounds. The drip of rain from leaves, the distant roll of a small rock slide, the faint call of birds hidden among the trees. Each sound reminded her that she was not entirely alone in the wilderness, even if human presence seemed impossible. She stumbled upon a narrow stream, its water clear and cold. She knelt and cupped her hands to drink, letting the crisp liquid wash away some of her fatigue. She felt a small spark of hope. Fresh water was always a sign of life, and it reminded her that the mountains were not only harsh, they could provide, if one was careful and observant. She filled her bottle as much as possible and took a few moments to rest. Her fingers were shaking as she refilled her bottle, but she felt stronger, if only slightly, with each sip. As the day wore on, her mind drifted to reflection. She thought about why she had chosen this journey, why she had set out alone in the first place. It had been her desire for independence, her wish to test herself against the unknown. She wanted freedom, a chance to prove that she could rely solely on herself. Yet now, Trapped beneath a broken wagon and pressed by cold, hunger, and isolation, she realized that freedom came with responsibility and danger. The mountains had taught her patience, respect, and humility. They were beautiful, yes, but they demanded vigilance and care. By late afternoon, the rain had slowed, but the clouds remained thick and gray. She returned to her wagon, exhausted but determined. She tried again to shift it, using every ounce of strength and every tool she had, but it stayed firmly in place. She sighed, letting herself rest against the wood for a moment, her forehead pressed to the cool surface. Fatigue threatened to overtake her, and a dull ache settled in her chest, not from pain, but from the weight of solitude. She realized that survival was not only physical, it was mental. She had to keep her mind sharp, her senses alert, and her hope alive. Night approached, and with it came deeper shadows and a heavier cold. She prepared herself as best she could, adjusting the blanket and her raincoat, curling beneath the wagon for shelter. Darkness fell quickly in the mountains, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the rustle of a small animal. Her mind raced with imagined dangers, a twisted ankle, a hidden crevice, a sudden fall. She clutched the blanket closer, reminding herself that fear could paralyze her, but determination could save her. She thought about sleep, about the hours she had managed to rest during the first night. Sleep was necessary, but it was also risky. Any lapse in attention could be dangerous in the mountains. She decided to close her eyes for short periods, letting herself rest while remaining alert. She focused on breathing, on the rhythm of her heartbeat, and on the quiet sounds around her. Each breath reminded her that she was alive, that she had survived one day and could survive another. In the middle of the night, she felt movement in the shadows. Her eyes snapped open, and her heart leapt. At first, she thought it was the wind, but there was something deliberate in the way the shadow shifted. She held her breath, watching as the movement grew closer, careful and silent. Her mind raced. Who, or what, could it be? She thought about calling out, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she stayed hidden, observing, her pulse quickening with both dread and hope. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The shadow lingered at the edge of her vision, then slowly retreated. She could not tell if it was another traveler, an animal, or simply a trick of the light. But the encounter reminded her that she was not entirely alone. Someone, or something, was nearby, aware of her presence. The thought brought a strange mixture of comfort and caution. She knew that in these mountains, silence could be as meaningful as speech, and observation could be as vital as action. By the third day, her body was near exhaustion. Hunger pressed heavily against her stomach, and every step required monumental effort. Her hands were raw, her feet blistered, and her clothes damp from constant exposure to mist and rain. Yet she continued, motivated by the faint possibility of finding help or a safe path. She scouted the area around the wagon once more, searching for anything she might have missed, a trail, a shelter, a sign that another human being might be close. Small victories sustained her. She found a slightly elevated patch of land near a boulder, where she could rest without being pressed against wet soil. She managed to spark a tiny fire using dry twigs she had hidden in her backpack, warming her fingers and offering a brief sense of safety. Even the smallest comforts, dry clothing, fresh water, a fire, were victories, reminders that she could survive if she remained careful and attentive. As the third night approached, she lay beneath the wagon once more, her body sore and weary, but her mind sharper than ever. She reflected on the lessons she had learned over these 3 days: patience, observation, endurance, and the ability to find hope even in the bleakest circumstances. She understood that the mountains were unforgiving, but they also offered opportunities for survival if one was willing to fight and stay vigilant. And then, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, she noticed a faint movement far along the trail, a figure, tall and silent, moving deliberately but slowly. Her heart skipped a beat. She watched carefully, unsure of whether to call out or stay hidden. The figure paused briefly, almost as if sensing her presence, and then continued in the same quiet, deliberate manner. For the first time in 3 days, a flicker of hope stirred in her chest. Perhaps this was not just a shadow of fear or imagination. Perhaps it was a human being, someone who could offer help, someone who might understand her struggle. She stayed still, barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen next. She did not know who this person was or why they were here, but a silent promise seemed to hang in the air. Her ordeal was not yet over, but relief might finally be within reach. The morning light barely pierced the thick clouds over the mountains. The young woman lay beneath the broken wagon, her body sore from the last 3 days, but her eyes were wide open, scanning the rocky path ahead. She had seen movement the night before, just a shadow, distant and silent, but it had left a mark on her mind. A small, cautious spark of hope now warmed her chest. Perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed. She took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the morning air bite her lungs. Every muscle ached, every joint protested with stiffness, yet she forced herself to rise. The broken wagon still lay stubbornly in place, its heavy wood unmoved despite her constant efforts. She brushed the dirt from her clothes and adjusted her small backpack, determined to keep moving. Her legs wobbled slightly, but determination drove her forward. The mountains were harsh, yes, but they were also alive, full of lessons for anyone who would listen. As she began to explore a little farther along the path, she caught sight of him. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with careful, deliberate steps. His hair was long and unkempt, his clothes rough and practical, and his eyes, when she saw them, were calm and sharp. He seemed to know the mountains as if they were a part of him, stepping over rocks and roots without hesitation. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming, but the way he paused and looked in her direction confirmed that he was real. She froze, unsure of how to react. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear and cautious hope. She had spent 3 days alone, surviving on her own wits and limited supplies, and now here was a stranger, strong, silent, and unfamiliar. Would he be friendly, or was he another obstacle in her struggle to survive? She decided to stay hidden, pressing herself low against the rocks, watching as he moved closer. His pace was slow and measured but purposeful, and it was clear he was aware of her presence. Finally, he stopped a few feet away. He did not speak immediately. He only looked at her, calm and steady, as if waiting for her to make the next move. She felt a shiver run through her body, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his gaze. Then, in a voice that was quiet but firm, he said only 2 words, "Come home." There was no judgment, no demand, only an invitation. She hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why was he here? And what did he mean by "come home"? Yet in those words, there was something she could not ignore. A promise of safety, of warmth, of a place where she could rest. She took a cautious step forward. He remained still, allowing her to approach, but his eyes never left her. There was an unspoken understanding in his presence, a quiet strength that seemed to say, "You are safe here, but respect the land and move carefully." She realized that he was not just any stranger. He was someone who belonged to these mountains, someone who understood them completely. Tentatively, she asked, "Are you going to help me?" Her voice sounded small, almost fragile, but the words had weight. The man nodded slightly, a simple gesture that carried reassurance. He did not speak again, but instead began to move slowly down the path, glancing back once to indicate that she should follow. She hesitated for only a moment before picking up her pace, grateful for the silent guidance. As they moved together, she noticed how he navigated the terrain with ease. His steps were sure, his balance flawless, and he seemed to know exactly where to place each foot. She stumbled a few times on loose stones and tree roots, but he remained a few steps ahead, patient and unhurried. It was clear that he had been in these mountains many times before, and that his presence here was natural, almost instinctive. She began to speak, breaking the silence, even though he did not respond immediately. She told him about the wagon, about her struggle over the past 3 days, about her hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Her words poured out in a rush, and she realized that saying them aloud made her feel lighter, less trapped by her fear. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. His attention was complete, focused entirely on her, and that in itself was comforting. When she paused, he finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You must keep your strength," he said simply. "The mountains are hard, but they reward care and patience." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Even after 3 days of struggle, she had learned that the mountains demanded respect and observation. Every step mattered, every decision counted, and fatigue could easily lead to mistakes. His presence reminded her that safety was not just about finding shelter. It was about guidance, knowledge, and careful attention. They continued along the narrow path, and she noticed small details she had missed before. A hidden spring trickling down a rocky slope, a flat boulder that could serve as a resting spot, a natural overhang that might offer shelter from sudden rain. He pointed these things out with small gestures, a tilt of the head, a sweep of the hand, a pause that indicated, "Here is safe." She followed, learning quickly, grateful for the silent instruction. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small clearing where the sun broke through the clouds, shining weakly on a patch of dry ground. He gestured for her to sit, and she sank to the earth gratefully, stretching stiff legs and aching back. He handed her a small bundle of food, some bread and dried meat. She hesitated, but he gave a slight nod, encouraging her to eat. The food was simple, but it felt luxurious after days of near starvation. Every bite revived her energy and spirit, reminding her that survival was possible when guided wisely. As they rested, she observed him more closely. His face was weathered, marked by years of living in the mountains, but there was kindness in his eyes. His hands were strong, capable, and yet gentle in the way he offered her food. She realized that he had chosen to help her, not because of obligation, but because he understood struggle, survival, and compassion. There was a quiet dignity in his silence, a patience that spoke louder than words ever could. After a short rest, he stood and began to move again. She followed, feeling stronger, more capable with each step. He led her along a winding path, avoiding steep drops and loose rocks, guiding her carefully toward a safer area. Along the way, she asked questions about the mountains, about him, about how he knew the safe paths. He answered sparingly, each word deliberate, each explanation clear. He did not talk unnecessarily, but each piece of advice was valuable, showing her that survival depended on observation, understanding, and respect. As the sun dipped lower, they reached the edge of a small stream. The man paused, crouched down, and gestured for her to drink. The water was clear and cold, invigorating her tired body. She realized that every step she had taken with him had taught her more than 3 days alone in the mountains could have. He showed her how to observe the environment, how to recognize subtle signs of safety and danger, how to move efficiently without wasting energy. The journey continued, and the sky darkened as evening approached. They came upon a small cabin partially hidden by trees and rocks. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, promising warmth and safety. The man looked at her, then at the cabin, and said again simply, "Come home." She understood now that home was not just a place. It was a state of safety, comfort, and trust. She felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. Inside the cabin, a fire burned low in the hearth. The man guided her to a small corner where she could rest without fear of cold or damp. She sank to the floor, exhausted but grateful. He remained nearby, tending to the fire, ensuring that she had warmth, water, and a place to rest. For the first time in 3 days, she felt completely safe. The fear, cold, and hunger that had pressed on her chest began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of peace. As the night settled over the mountains, she reflected on the encounter. This silent mountain man had appeared at the exact moment she needed help. His presence had changed everything. He did not demand explanations or question her decisions. He offered guidance, patience, and safety. She realized that her survival had depended not just on her strength and endurance, but on his quiet wisdom, his knowledge of the mountains, and his willingness to help without hesitation. And as she drifted into sleep, she knew that the mountains, once a place of fear and struggle, had become a place of learning, understanding, and hope. She was no longer alone, and with the silent mountain man by her side, she could face the journey ahead with renewed strength and courage. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged peaks of the mountains, spilling pale gold across the small cabin where the young woman had slept. Her body still ached from the days of struggle, but the warmth of the fire and the comfort of the cabin had restored some of her strength. For the first time in 3 days, she felt a quiet sense of safety, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. The silent mountain man had remained nearby throughout the night, tending to the fire and ensuring that she had water and dry blankets. As she stretched stiff limbs and took in her surroundings, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Just days ago, she had been trapped beneath a broken wagon, alone, hungry, cold, and uncertain if she would survive. Now, guided by this quiet stranger, she felt the weight of hope settle back into her chest. She understood that survival was not only about strength and endurance, but also about trust, observation, and the kindness of others. The man did not speak immediately, allowing her to gather herself. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew these mountains as part of himself.
"You must eat," he said simply, gesturing toward a small plate of food he had prepared.
She moved to it gratefully, feeling the warmth of nourishment seep into her tired body. The bread was simple, the fruit and dried meat modest, but each bite was like a spark rekindling her strength. As she ate, she noticed small details she had overlooked before. The cabin was sturdy, built with thick wood and stones, designed to withstand the harsh mountain weather. A small stack of firewood sat neatly beside the hearth, ready for the cold nights ahead. Outside the window, the mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks now bathed in morning light. The scene was beautiful, but it reminded her of how unforgiving this environment could be. She had learned to respect it, to observe carefully, and to move with awareness. After a short rest, the mountain man gestured for her to prepare for the journey down. She nodded, feeling a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. The path back would be long, and she knew her strength was still limited. Yet with his guidance, she felt capable. He led her out of the cabin and onto a narrow trail that wound down the mountainside. Each step was careful, deliberate, and measured. He showed her where to place her feet, how to avoid loose stones, and how to use small rocks and roots for balance. The journey down was not easy. Her legs were stiff, her back ached, and her body protested every movement. Yet with each step, she felt a growing sense of confidence. She realized that the mountains, once terrifying and isolating, had become teachers. She had learned to endure, to observe, and to act with patience. Each piece of guidance from the mountain man reinforced that knowledge, teaching her that survival was not only about fighting against the elements, but also about moving with them. Along the way, he pointed out small signs of life, tracks in the mud, the call of distant birds, the rustle of hidden animals. Each detail was important, a clue that helped her navigate the landscape. She listened carefully, absorbing every lesson. The man did not explain everything, but his gestures and subtle guidance were enough. She began to understand the language of the mountains, the quiet messages hidden in every sound, shadow, and movement. By midday, they reached a larger clearing, where the terrain was less steep and more open. Sunlight now spilled freely, warming her chilled skin. She could see the trail leading down to a distant road, where she hoped to find other travelers or a village. Her heart lifted at the sight, the first tangible sign that her ordeal might soon end. She glanced at the mountain man, who remained calm and vigilant, his eyes scanning the surrounding peaks as if to ensure that no danger threatened them. During the journey, she began to speak more, sharing thoughts and reflections aloud. She told him about her fear, her exhaustion, and the moments when she had nearly lost hope. He listened quietly, occasionally nodding or offering a brief word of encouragement. She realized that although he had not sought her story, he understood it fully. His presence alone conveyed empathy, patience, and respect. She felt gratitude deepen in her chest, realizing that she owed her survival not just to her own determination, but also to his quiet guidance. As the afternoon light softened, they finally reached the edge of the forest that bordered the mountains. The trail opened onto a dirt road, where the trees thinned and the signs of civilization began to appear in the distance. She could see smoke rising from chimneys, hear faint sounds of people moving, and even spot a few distant figures walking along the road. Relief and joy surged through her, a powerful reminder of what it meant to survive. She was no longer trapped, no longer isolated, no longer entirely dependent on her own limited strength. The mountain man paused at the edge of the forest, gesturing for her to stop. He looked at her for the first time in a long while, his eyes steady and thoughtful. "From here," he said, "you can reach home safely. Remember what you have learned. Watch, listen, and move carefully." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Words felt insufficient to express her gratitude, but her eyes conveyed everything she felt. The silence between them was heavy with understanding. She knew that she would never forget him, nor the lessons of patience, endurance, and trust that he had taught her. She took a deep breath, stepping onto the dirt road, feeling the sun on her face and the earth beneath her boots. Each step was lighter than the last, infused with hope and renewed energy. She looked back once at the mountains, their peaks now glowing in the late afternoon light, and felt a sense of awe. They had been her challenge, her teacher, and in some ways her companion through hardship. But it was the human connection, the silent mountain man's guidance, that had turned struggle into survival. As she walked down the road, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the first day, trapped beneath the broken wagon, shivering and alone. She remembered the second day, struggling with exhaustion, hunger, and the relentless terrain. And she remembered the third day, when the first shadow appeared, leading to the moment she had met the mountain man. Each memory carried lessons about resilience, courage, patience, and the quiet power of human kindness. By evening, she reached a small village at the base of the mountains. The streets were simple, lined with wooden houses, and the smell of cooking fires filled the air. Children played nearby, laughing and calling to one another, and adults moved about their daily tasks. The contrast to the mountains was stark. Here, life was structured, warm, and familiar. She felt a deep sense of relief, knowing she was safe, and yet she also felt a strange longing for the quiet challenge of the peaks she had left behind. She found a small inn where she could rest, and the innkeeper offered food and a warm bed without hesitation. As she ate, her mind wandered back to the silent mountain man. She realized that he had not only saved her life, but had also taught her something invaluable about trust, observation, and humility. He had offered help without expecting anything in return, had guided her without judgment, and had shown her that strength and kindness could coexist quietly, without fanfare. That night, lying in a comfortable bed, she allowed herself to feel fully safe for the first time in days. The ache in her body was still there, but it was softened by warmth and rest. She thought about the mountains, about the lessons she had learned, and about the silent stranger who had appeared at exactly the right moment. Gratitude swelled within her, mingled with a profound sense of awe for both the wilderness and the people who understand it deeply. In the days that followed, she shared her story with close friends and family. She recounted the fear, the struggle, and the exhaustion, but also the hope, guidance, and eventual safety. Every retelling reinforced the lessons she had learned, that endurance is important, that observing the environment carefully can save lives, and that human kindness can appear when least expected. The memory of the silent mountain man stayed with her, a quiet reminder that sometimes help comes in forms that are subtle, steady, and humble. She realized that survival is never only about oneself. It is about listening, observing, trusting when necessary, and accepting help when it is offered. The mountains had tested her, but the mountain man had guided her, teaching her that strength is not measured solely by physical endurance, but also by the ability to trust, learn, and grow. She felt stronger now, not just physically, but in spirit, knowing she could face challenges with a renewed understanding of courage and humility. And so she moved forward with her life, forever changed by the experience. She would remember the cold nights beneath the wagon, the hunger that pressed against her, the relentless climb, and the shadow that appeared when hope seemed dimmest. Most importantly, she would remember the silent mountain man whose simple words, "Come home," had carried her from despair to safety, from fear to hope, from isolation to trust. Though the mountains lay behind her, their lessons stayed with her. She had survived, she had learned, and she had grown. The journey had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but it had also shown her the power of human connection and the quiet strength that resides in patience, observation, and compassion. As she looked to the future, she carried those lessons with her, a treasure more valuable than anything else the mountains could have offered.